Thank you. My name is Danny Postel, and I work with a magazine called Open Democracy. It's not an organization, I should point out. It's an online journal and forum that can be found at opendemocracy.net. I'm also on the editorial board of a left-wing journal called Logos, also online at logosjournal.com. I should say I came of age politically in the 1980s in my involvement with the Central America Solidarity Movement. It was a movement that very much that was formative in the development of my political consciousness and my understanding of the world, and that to this day is a reference point for me when I think about things like solidarity, internationalism, and imperialism. To be on the left in the 1980s and to have anything to do with the Central America Solidarity Movement, very much like our elders at that time who had come to the Central America Solidarity Movement from the movement to end the Vietnam War. In both of those struggles, anti-imperialism was the air that we breathed. It was the given. It was the stuff of radical politics and solidarity activism. So in the 1990s, during the Balkan Wars that have been referred to in two of the presentations so far, it was very confusing to many of us on the left to try to figure out what was happening in Yugoslavia as that state became engulfed in a paroxysm of nationalist violence and genocidal murder. Not only did the anti-imperialist paradigm that we had inherited from the Vietnam War and the Central America solidarity struggles, not only did that paradigm not particularly help us understand what was going on in Yugoslavia, Kevin and I and many others on the left have argued that in fact the tunnel vision anti-imperialism of much of the Western left actually distorted and occluded a clear analysis of what was happening in Yugoslavia and in the Balkans. I wish Nick were right when he suggests that it was really only a marginal or somewhat imaginary left that supported Milosevic. The extent of left-wing support for Milosevic and Serbian ethno-fascism may in fact have been exaggerated by some, but it was indeed real, and it was indeed associated with some of the most prominent people on the left, like Michael Parenti, a name that surely means something to many in this room. Michael Parenti helped organize the International Committee to defend Slobodan Milosevic and wrote a book called To Kill a Nation, published by Verso, perhaps the most prominent left-wing book publisher in the English language, and who wrote the introduction to the Serbian or Serbo-Croatian translation of that book, none other than Milosevic himself. And Parenti, although he is certainly an idiosyncratic individual in many ways, was hardly alone in this sense. Diana Johnstone, Edward Herman, the co-author of perhaps the most famous leftist in the world, Noam Chomsky, on about 8 books, Michel Chossudovsky, Jared Israel, the list goes on and on. There was, in fact, sadly, something of a Milosevic left, if you will. But the important thing is not to emphasize, the individual leftists who came to see Milosevic sympathetically, but rather to diagnose what was it exactly that led a number of people on the international left to see Milosevic's regime as somehow a form of resistance against global capital or Western imperialism. There was a dead end, a dark alley that many on the left were led down in the 1990s. You can find rather, I think, a brilliant anatomy of that thinking in an essay by the Marxist philosopher Slavoj Žižek, who wrote a piece for New Left Review at the time of the Kosovo War called Against the Double Blackmail, in which he argued that leftists need to be against both Western imperialism and its false antithesis in the form of ethno-fascism, gangster capitalism, the idea that Slobodan Milosevic was a socialist and resisting Western capital, or was an anti-imperialist resisting the encroachment of NATO and Western imperialism, is truly, it would be truly laughable were it not so tragic and bloody. The fact is, as Žižek pointed out, the Milosevic regime, like many others, represented not a form of resistance or opposition to global capital or Western empire, but rather the mirror image of those systems. So I strongly, oh my God, I've only scratched the surface. Let me just walk very quickly. See, I warned you about this. I'm going to walk very quickly through a couple of the key points I want to make, and maybe in the discussion we can get further into this.